Game bundles, Steam sales, 2D waifus. All three of these things have one common thread. They take my money and give me very little in return. Well, I say the day has finally come for me to try and get my money's worth, at least out of the first two. Over the past few years, I've accumulated a humble total of 567 Steam games, of which I have played around 5. Now, these range in quality from one-man indie trash to AAA titles, but I feel each and every one of these nugs needs at least a chance to impress me. Now, I don't necessarily intend on completing every game in my library, but I would like to know enough about each one so that I can sort them into my fun time waster or shit I tried and didn't like brain boxes. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. The first game at the top of my Steam library is one that I'm actually a bit familiar with, if only a little. 100% Orange Juice is a classic little RNG deck builder board game where the objective is to run in circles like a NASCAR race while scooping up crack rocks and beating the shit out of indigenous animals, all for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Norman Reedus. Each time you hit his set goal and return to a home square, you will be rewarded with a star. After you have pleased Norman Reedus enough to create a small constellation, you win the game. Easy. There is an extensive story mode to this game that follows the journey of each of the main cast members, giving you glimpses of their life and dialogue in between hot and heady dice rolling and card clicking. But since I've only ever played QP, my extent of the lore knowledge is that the dog likes pudding. Now this game is pretty simple on the surface, but via deck building strategy and Reedus pleasing goals, it does have a high enough skill ceiling to make scrubs like me go, ah, yes, I will never be good at this shit. Overall, this game, much like Mario Party and other games of that nature, is a blast to play with friends. Or at least that's what I've heard. I don't have any friends to play with. Please send me some friends. I really want to play this game with somebody. On top of the core game, there's a bunch of extra content, mini-games, gacha systems, and more to explore if you need a break from rolling dice like Oogie Boogie on speed. As far as I can tell, the team behind this game has been pretty good about shooting in new content and events at a fairly regular pace for the past 7 years that it's been out, making it no wonder why the game has a pretty active and passionate community around it. This is definitely a fun game to pick up on a Steam sale if somehow you don't already own it, and I think it has a comfy spot reserved in my Cool Beans box. Next up in my list is a game I'd never given a try by the name of 2 Ninjas, 1 Cup. Yeah, I know, sounds right up my alley, but never judge a book by its title, especially when that book is a garbage dookie platformer made by an ultra-hilarious Polski dingo. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. Somebody did put some level of effort into this, and it isn't the worst game that I own, but it is far from an experience I would deem good, and probably lands more around an experience I would deem kinda better than eating live rats. The game's art and sound design are bad, but passable, assuming they were probably all done by one Polish man in his garage. But where the real trouble lies for me is in the gameplay and dialogue. Now, I'm not an amazing platformer by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know when being bad is a result of my chimp-like brain, and when it's instead caused by a game controlling like utter trash. Jumping in this game is a core mechanic, as it is in most platformers. But not only does it feel bad, it also doesn't even register your inputs half the time. Some other mechanics, like jumping on slime blobs, aren't consistent at all in where they launch you. And most of the ones on platforms have space on either side that, if you're unfortunate enough to land on, leave you trapped with no way to gain momentum needed to carry on. Thankfully, these bad controls do match pretty well with the bad humor. For every chuckle the game got out of me, there were 10 exasperated sighs at the terrible and overly prevalent poop and dick jokes. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of an occasional crude goof. Having every bit of dialogue in your game filled to the brim with them, though, is a bit taxing. Now, this game is pretty short, having only a few levels and a couple boss fights, but the sheer difficulty brought on by the controls and level design stretch the game out to just an uncomfortable length. I mean, come on guys, I just want to get to the next sweet fart joke already. Sadly, I'm gonna have to say that this title is going in my not enough poop jokes box. 2V Hoverbike is a pretty generic shoot 'em up that doesn't really have too much going for it, to be perfectly honest. No need to fear for all you speed demons out there though. The only graphics option on this bad boy is fast. The controls are okay, although honestly I'd prefer to be able to use my mouse instead of the arrow keys in a shoot 'em up. And the hitboxes, whilst not amazing, are definitely passable. The enemies are a bit boring, consisting of lots of generic spaceships and the occasional tennis ball or plant. This isn't particularly challenging as a shoot 'em up, with a stupidly high drop rate for extra lives and shields. There's a story to this game as well, but I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I didn't even try and read it. Nothing about this game really stood out to me or dragged me in. It just felt stale and unpolished, like it was somebody's school project or something. While this is a perfectly playable option, I ended up getting pretty bored after the first couple bosses and quit out. Sadly, I'm gonna have to say this one goes in the meh box for me. Oh boy. I knew just from the catchy name and the Steam page that we had something real special here. 30 Seconds to Jail is a point-and-click game that puts you in the shoes of a mysterious man I can only assume is named Greg, who is visited by a strange man in a trench coat. This bad boy drops a coin purse on your floor and then leaves without a word. On further inspection, it becomes pretty clear that the coin purse actually contains drugs and, I can only assume, some kind of naughty activity detector, as 30 seconds after you receive the sweet brain candies, the cops will bust down your door and immediately take you into custody. Now, I know what you're thinking. How do you win this game? Great question. You kinda don't. There's a series of different outcomes depending on what objects you interact with throughout the house, but there's absolutely no guidance as to what to do, what you can do, or really what's going on at all. Most of the objects you can interact with blend seamlessly into the background, which makes it just a little hard to tell what you can actually interact with. And some of the endings are so strange and convoluted that there's no way you would figure them out without looking at the one guide on the Steam page. Which is exactly what I did. I think my favorite ending to this shit game is where, when Mr. Naughty Drug Man comes knocking at the door, instead of actually playing the game, you simply stand there until he leaves, which, for me, took a solid 7 minutes. Very fun gameplay, guys. There's really not much to say about this game other than it's short, boring, and kind of feels like some trash you'd play on Newgrounds 12 years ago. Most of the endings to this game give off that, oh, XD so random vibe, while also putting in little to no effort to actually make it funny. Honestly, there isn't much fun to say about this garbage game, so let's just throw it in the trash box and move on. Now, from what I can tell, the 39 Steps is just a visual novel adaptation of some 1915 mystery thriller novel. I would be completely lying if I said I had any interest in this plot at all, but I did have to give it a good go to see if there was anything to write home about in it. From what I experienced, there aren't really any choices, branch storytelling, or different endings to this visual novel. It seems like it's just the original story from the novel. The story comes to us in a nice mixture of voiceover and text blended together pretty well, and the background Foley work in it is actually pretty relaxing. Be warned though, this is not for the casual gamer. This visual novel contains a singular gameplay mechanic which may just be the hardest puzzle of all time. Draw shape. Thankfully, after numerous failed attempts to crack this challenge, I found out I could skip it, and anything else in the game for that matter, by just pushing the enter key. Honestly, I think the speedrunning community is gonna go bananas about this little exploit. The story itself seems pretty good, but I'd like to make 2 suggestions to improve on it. Firstly, they should definitely put heavier emphasis on the homoerotic tension between the protagonist and the man he helps. The passion there was palpable, but it was a little too subtle. Secondly, they need to replace these weird, ghost-shaped silhouettes with some hot tootie girls. Now, you may be on the fence about these changes, as they are a little extreme, but let's take a look at some proof of concept that might just sway you.
I'll trust you for the night. I'll lock you into this room and keep the key. Just one word, Mr. Scudder. I believe you're straight, but if so be you are not, I should warn you that I'm a handy man with a man.
I haven't the privilege of your name, sir, but let me tell you that you're a pretty gentleman. Now, I'll thank you to lend me your lock. Come.
Overall, this seems like a good alternative to picking up the actual novel for 39 steps, but until they fix the relationship dynamics and the art, it's gonna sit in my needs more tootie titty box. And I think we're gonna end there for the Steam reviews today. We made it through 5 games, pretty much only found one good one, but hey, we put a sizable dent in our list. That brings the total number down to 562 left to review. Oh boy.